Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting fireside chat from EcoITCon. I'm your host, Archana Joshi, and today we have a very interesting topic to discuss with all of you. The topic is key imperatives for a sustainable CIO organization. And to discuss about this topic, we have with us Keziah Quek. Keziah is based in Singapore. She is the sustainability lead at CapGemini for specifically the Southeast Asia region. Keziah is a well-known face in the sustainability community. I've heard her speak in multiple forums, and she brings in a unique perspective on how large enterprises kind of are working on their sustainability agenda, as she closely works with some of those clients as part of her Capgemini role. And within that, specifically focusing on the environmental impact within the business and IT. Welcome to the Fireside Chat, Keziah. Looking forward to hear your thoughts today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashna. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, Keziah, this entire topic of sustainability is gaining traction across the globe. Past 2 years, we have seen immense focus from all the enterprises, all the industries alike, be it IT, be it technology, be it aviation. All of these industries are pretty much focusing on this. Now, given that you work with diverse industry sectors, how are you seeing these trends across different industry domains? And what exactly is happening from an IT emission standpoint within these domains?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question, and I think a great way to start. Well, actually, we've done some pretty strong research from a global perspective on how companies that are employing digital technologies are thinking about or driving sustainability. And what we found is that I think across the board, everybody is generally aware that sustainability is important. Everybody is generally aware that our IT estates have a carbon footprint. The question is, I think what's really the interesting question here is, do we know how much carbon our technology is emitting? And from a company level, like, do we know how much our own companies are emitting, so that what gets measured gets done. So I think it's really helpful for us to know that number, right, to begin with, and that can help create a business case for us to start reducing our carbon emissions. So what we found is that the best performers in terms of industry are in industrial manufacturing. The global average was about 55% of executives who agree that they know how much carbon their technology emits. The industrial manufacturing came in about 10% more than the global average, followed by the energy sector, tied with the consumer product sector. So I would say these three are kind of the sectors that scored the highest in terms of knowing how much, having measured how much carbon their IT estate is emitting. If you're interested, I think the laggards are not too far. I think that the top three that I've mentioned are about 63 to 61%. And then on the lower side would be 53, 52, and 42%. Aerospace and defense, telecommunications, healthcare, and life sciences, respectively.
What is interesting that you said in the industry sectors is your industrial manufacturing, energy, and consumer products, right? And that is kind of also seeing how we are looking at it in the market standpoint. When we go and approach, let's say, any of us as consumers, we go and approach any departmental store, for example, you do see that departmental stores are declaring and being more aware and making sure the consumers are aware. And similarly, you see the same happening in manufacturing and industrial areas as well, because they have got a head start in moving and being aware a little bit around these initiatives. Now, my question is that laggards are also equally investing it and making sure that they are not left behind. So overall, there seems to be a focused initiatives that are being taken by the companies to invest in the technologies to aid them and manage this better, right? And there could be various technologies which companies are looking at. So my view would be is that with these leading and lagging industry domains, what is it that is common that everyone is investing into to manage their sustainability agenda better?
Absolutely. And I think that's a great next component of conversation to shift to. I'd just like to make I think, a clarification of like what we're talking about. Because I think while we're talking about the sustainable footprint or the IT footprint of of an estate, right? We're talking about, okay, can we deploy technology that decreases our IT estate's footprint, right? And there's also the adoption of technology to say, can we reduce the emissions that our entire supply chain and value chain generates when we produce the products that we for the market, right? And I think that we can cut across those two things. And the ones that I'm going to allude to right now tend to be in the second category, where I think, and it's kind of the low-hanging fruit. If you Google sustainability, for manufacturing whatsoever, you're gonna see a lot of these technologies come up. And I feel like I've heard many conversations discuss about, for example, AI, IoT, digital twins, and these are all really valuable things that drive optimization of processes. It saves manpower hours, potentially saves paper, it saves material because we're only producing as much as we need, or we're trying to optimize for that, or we get better insights to reduce wastage and so forth. I think that's really great to talk about. But if anything, the part of the conversation I'm seeing that's missing, it's more about how do we look at, and this fireside chat is about sustainable IT. It's like, how do we make sure that our IT estate is as sustainable as possible, and how do we start on that journey? But very happy, I think, to jump back into this in a bit. We do have some case studies that we're very happy to share in terms of like who's, a Japanese hotel that's used AI to reduce food waste, for example. Organizations that are using IoT and smart factories to better drive their energy consumption to reduce that, reduce e-waste, for example, optimizing supply chains and so forth. But as said, I would love to jump into how CIOs can be taking action starting at home. At home meaning in the organizations they work in.
Yeah. I like the way you divided into two parts. The first part, which you said that making sure the emissions of the IT state itself are controlled. And second is leveraging IT to control your overall emissions. And that's where the examples that you gave of AI, automation, digital twins, IoT, and all kind of fit in there. Now, coming back to the first part, which is more important for the topic of today, which is focused on the CIOs, where they have to make sure their own emissions are maintained and controlled. The IT landscape is vast. You have your networks, you have your IT apps, you have your databases, you have your servers, you have your hardware systems, software keeps on changing. It's not as simple as it was perhaps 20, 25 years ago. The landscape of IT is changing continuously, right? And then that brings to the question that how do CIOs even get started? Where do they start? And is it enough that the CIOs bring in certain practices to inculcate in their own area? Or any changes have to be done at an organization level as well? So, if you could talk about both of these things in terms of the practices a CIO have to bring in within their own teams, as well as certain policies at an org level, I think that will help our viewers and audience understand this much better.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think just maybe starting with what sustainable IT looks like, right, from a CIO perspective. I think you're absolutely right. It's gotten more and more complicated, especially I think in the move to cloud arena, also like going from, on-premise servers to virtual machines and so forth, having data spread out over multiple areas and having to call them in, having to put in APIs, having to access data, dealing with latency, and all of these trade-offs, extremely, extremely complex. And I don't claim to be an expert in that area. I do see, I think, the struggle, and I do see the complexity, and we have a lot of respect for that. And after all, a lot of the work that we're doing at CapGemini are helping our clients to transition from legacy to modern IT systems that allow them to function right in a digital world. And sustainability is quite compatible with that. I mean, if you look at some basic things around making sure that you're not paying for too much ingress or egress of data, for example, right? So we always like to say that cost incentivizes savings, right? For example, if you put a photocopying machine, I don't know, in a business center hotel, and you don't charge people per photocopy, you're gonna have a lot of wastage because people are not gonna most likely not going to think about it, right? They're just going to photocopy as much as they like. But if you put a tap card and people have to pay for it, even if it's 10 cents, 5 cents a copy, you're going to see people think twice, right? Or look to save. So it is, I think, in the same vein, very often we see as a strategy, that IT professionals want to. It's easier to tie sustainability savings with energy savings, cost savings, and that's a great way to start. And let's see, I think you mentioned several domains as well in sustainable IT. I think that's the initial framework we'll start with. So cloud is a big area that we're seeing for potential savings, especially if you're going to be decommissioning existing on-premise serverware. Of course, if you're increasing the storage, you're increasing the computing power that you need to process new applications so far in the cloud. I want to point out that just moving to cloud is not necessarily a guarantee that you're being more sustainable, right? There are ways and easy ways to assess this. You can look at how much computing power and energy usage you're using before and after, making that subtraction, and then you can see if you're sustainable. But green cloud architecture is definitely something to look into. If we're looking at networking, communication systems, applications, and data, these things are also opportunities to rationalize. I think very often we just end up with a lot of data that we don't need, or we're running applications that we don't not crucial or not critical anymore, or we're seeing lots of duplications. So being able to take stock of applications, taking stock of data, and just making sure that we have what we need. And I would say, during a migration, that's the best time to do that stock take as well. Let's see. So I don't know if this will be helpful, but here's some numbers, right, in terms to just illustrate the savings for cloud migration, and specifically migrating to cloud architecture that uses renewable energy sources, right, could prevent up to 629 million tons of carbon emissions by 2024 for an organization. Of course, this is dependent on the amount of data and what's being migrated. And from our research, we've seen that only about 40% of executives say that their organizations are using low energy consumption green cloud architecture for their data centers. So lots of opportunity there, I think, to make a difference. And I think that's a real low hanging fruit that we're seeing possible on a day-to-day basis. Let's see what else. Is there, based on what I said so far, I think, is that kind of answering the question that you're looking at?
Yeah, it is. And the interesting point that you brought out is the fact that it's just about 40% of the execs who are still there. So there's a lot to be done, and it needs to be done even faster for in terms of the changes that as CIO has to incorporate to make sure their technology is not making the footprint worse. The second aspect that I kind of liked is that when you do refresh of your technology stack, and when you do modernization, or the term that you used is rationalization of your application portfolio, I think that's the best part to get started, where you can start off with a clean slate for the new app stack and new tech stack that you're doing, and also make sure that you can clean out the weeds, if you will, to use that term, and remove the things which are not working in your favor, right? So I think a great way for the CIOs to get started from app standpoint, and an easier way perhaps to get started. If I build upon that and take that a little further into that question, my question would be is, hey, if you have to tell a CIO that these are some of the call to actions that you need to be doing, what would your recommendation be? Because as you know, we are nearing, within next 3 months we would be nearing the end of the year. There would be a lot of work that has already started within different organizations for their next year budgets, next year initiatives, and we want to make sure that the CIOs and the leadership community in an IT space actually looks at it and factors those kind of things for their upcoming agenda. What would those be?
Absolutely. I think that's a really great way to structure, I think, the second part of this conversation. So we have made some recommendations in our sustainable IT report, and I think I'll highlight just a few, I think, of ways to get started that are very tangible. So first of all, I think the CIO or the CTO has a great opportunity to guide their organizations in strengthening sustainable IT practices, right? We're seeing a lot of initial initiatives around reducing e-waste from servers, laptops, equipment. So that's the hardware angle that you mentioned about, right? Optimizing on-premise infrastructure, transitioning to the green cloud. But that's kind of separate initiatives. They're kind of like, piecemeal initiatives. But if we're looking at CIOs establishing maybe a end-to-end holistic sustainability program that has scale, has impact from day one to 2-3 years from now, a great way to start would really be to, if you haven't already, conduct a diagnostic assessment of the environmental impact of your IT estate. What is the carbon footprint of your data centers, for example, your application portfolio, so that you understand where the hotspots are, where are the greatest emission savings that you could make, right? And you might even want to use diagnostic tools to set up that baseline and then look at other organizations similar to you to understand, where are you and how much better could you be doing? I think we all want to be leaders, right? And so I think base benchmarking is a great piece. After that, we want to look at creating a comprehensive sustainable IT strategy that's aligned with your organization's global sustainability strategy. I think a big problem that we're seeing a lot of time is that every C-suite member is acting alone in their sustainability journey. I think there's usually a global target that's set by the organization and in different countries translated for their markets. And it's not very clear sometimes what the KPIs are, or if there is clearly set KPIs, everyone does it differently. And that's fine because we want to see, every market's different, every environment is different. But we want to make sure that the organization can scale these initiatives over time. So talk to the sustainability team, right? Try and understand how IT can include, take even the philosophy and understand like what the end goal is and build the initiatives and the strategy with that in mind, rather than looking for, it's like whack-a-mole, right? Like taking a mallet and just like looking for the first few things to do. I think that's a great start. We should really start. We shouldn't wait till everything's in order to start, but having overall strategy and communication with your sustainability team will be very, very helpful. Another aspect would be ensuring that you have a sustainability transformation roadmap that includes trusted data processes. So we're touching a little bit into the data side of things, which is how sustainable IT can help to enable an organization to drive sustainability. But at the end of the day, for sustainability, and to know where you're at, to track how well you're doing, it's all about looking at your emissions data. Right, and emissions data is so important to have so that you can drive organizational decision makings. You can make business cases, right? So what are the key ways that your decision making will be enhanced by emissions data? First, when you have emissions data, you can increase the visibility of your baseline emissions, identifying the hotspots as mentioned. The next would be being able to improve your existing business processes to streamline carbon intensive activities. Lastly, and I think this is where we want to see a lot of our clients get to, which is predicting and being able to prescribe business outcomes to identify further emissions reductions opportunities. So we start seeing the predictive aspect of things, and I think that's where it gets really exciting, and that's where maybe we might even see AI come into play in the future. One of the key problems that we saw in our research is that key decision makers in organizations don't necessarily have data they can trust, right? I think we have data, I'm sure we can pull emissions data, but is this something that we can talk to the board about and say this data is solid and we've verified it? So, and that's something the IT estate can help with, or the CIO's team can help with as well, which is to make sure the sustainability data is trusted, it's up to date, it's aligned, so that the insights can be then implemented. So in order for that to happen, we need to see a robust data governance structure, and the data needs to be transparent and accessible to as many people, if not everyone across the organization, so that everybody can play their part in driving sustainability.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say is that, and again, I think this is a whole different discipline, which is ensuring that sustainability is a pillar in software architecture. I think so that's where we're looking into your heads of engineering and their teams, right? How are they architecting? How are they choosing what goes in the architecture? Which systems speak to each other? Are we building this out with sustainable IT in mind, right? Do you have environmental guidelines on software deployment? Are you, and we talked about trade-offs earlier, are you including sustainability as one of the trade-offs to consider? Because there needs to be a balance. I think today we already have a balance between money, agility, compliance, but we don't necessarily have sustainability as part of that trade-off, menu. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah. I like the fact that you said right from an integrated sustainability strategy for a CIO, where you are not just looking at it in isolation, but look at it holistically across hardware, software area becomes crucial. The second part about the benchmarking and making sure the data that you are looking at is trusted, reliable, not just for the IT org, but also that data can give you certain future insights to take sustainability agenda forward by predicting and recommending where else you can reduce your emissions. So the second aspect of data becomes crucial. And the third part, which is actually a little more on the ground, hands on, where you are doing benchmarking, you are bringing in architecture, and driving the decision making and the trade offs when you decide on any architectural solutions, where sustainability is an important angle, right? So you've kind of covered right from the strategy to the call to action on a basic implementation basis. Now, these are the things that the CIO will implement at a team level. Anything that you believe needs to change at a policy level, um, within an organization, and any light that you can throw upon those areas.
Absolutely, and I love that we're getting into where the rubber hits the road, and I've got I think two key areas that are good examples of how to make sure that starts happening. So I'll touch on some policy, but also after that, I want to touch a little bit on culture and workforce and what it means, because
Sure.
a lot of what we're doing here is hard change in terms of policies, but it's also about people and culture, and that's really, really hard as well. But let's start with policy. So what we've seen and what we recommend actually is to look at setting a carbon cost for IT operations. We mentioned earlier what gets measured gets done. So that doesn't apply to just baselining and knowing how much we emit, but also for moving forward, be like, how much carbon emissions are we generating in our day-to-day IT operations? How are we able to industrialize that perspective among our teams so that everybody has an easy reference point whenever they're looking to add on something to the architecture or bring in a new software into the estate, or a new overhead, right? Can we easily look at that and say, how much would that actually cost in terms of carbon? And I think that's a great shorthand that not only the CIO's team, direct team can use, but that, for example, procurement, legal, finance can refer to as well, and that becomes a shorthand across the entire organization, which I think is a really, really exciting way to talk about sustainability in an organization. So we've seen this in Microsoft, for example. They introduced internal carbon fees in about 2012, and they levied the fees on internal business units to hold them financially responsible for reducing their carbon emissions. And in 2 years, the company nearly doubled their fee to $15 per metric ton. So, that's an industry leader. And I'm sure this is like, you're going to get so much pushback against this, right? Business units are going to be like, how can you charge us for this? And I'm sure there can be ways to take baby steps. But even just a concept of understanding that there is a cost to our planet, to the company's reputation, to the company's future carbon footprint, right? That will most likely have to be reported and will be judged on in the future. So I think it's a great way to start thinking and talking about it. The second piece I think everyone is a little more familiar with, which is making environmental impact a criteria for IT vendor selection. So, no IT estate is completely bespoke and completely, developed in-house. And we work with lots of vendors. Our clients work with lots of vendors, and we bring in partners to help them, and hyperscalers and so forth. So setting a criteria to evaluate the IT vendors, even having that discussion with IT vendors, I think will help CIOs to really discover all the work that the IT vendors are already doing in the sustainability area. There are so many tools, there's so many new products that IT vendors have developed as an add-on or new areas, new solutions that they've developed from a sustainability perspective. And we need to work very closely with vendors in order to succeed, to build the IT estate that we need. And so we need to take our vendors on that journey with us as well.
Yeah, and I'm also looking at the time. Very interesting conversation, but I think I just would be able to squeeze in one last question and would love to hear your thoughts. The part that you talked about culture, processes, people aspect, and within that specifically the org change management that has to be done. Would you talk how can people, companies go about doing that as well?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times this gets pointed to like HR and new learning and development teams. And I agree, I do think they're a crucial partner in the process, but it can't be outsourced to a siloed department in an organization, right? So from our research, we found that only about 41% of respondents mentioned that upskilling and reskilling their employees on sustainability skills is a top priority, right? So that's a really small number, and I think we can do much better. And what's key is that sustainability tends to be driven from top down, right? So we need the leaders to upskill, reskill, understand the business benefits, the imperative, not just moral, but also, license to operate. Sustainability is a way to become a license to operate. And can they identify what sustainability means for them, not just personally, but in their day-to-day role? What does it mean for you as a CIO, right, to build a sustainable IT estate, to build a sustainable IT department, looking at your global sustainability team's goals and really making that relevant for yourself so that can then be shared with your team members, your middle management, which goes all the way down to, your engineers. Prioritizing inclusivity, up and reskilling through the leadership, all the way down to embed sustainability in everyone's decisions, but also the skills. So if you're going to have engineers develop things and implement things, even having them understand your policies for sustainability, why we're doing it, and what the overall goal is really important. And I heard you echo me on the holistic aspect of it. I think very often we're seeing initial sustainability initiatives. They sound good, and we're reducing carbon emissions and so forth, but what is the final outcome? Does it fit in with the 5-year goal that we have, the 10-year goal that we have? Does it create any unwanted or unforeseen circumstances that are side effects that are not necessarily good for the environment? So lots of things to think about. I think long-termism is something that we're not good at as a species, but if we want to have a planet that survives and is a good place to live for us and our children, we need to switch up and evolve a little bit in terms of how we think and how we work.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Keziah, for those interesting thoughts. Right from looking at a holistic strategy, moving to benchmarking, data collection, to the aspects of organizational change management, and involving your teams and people so that they believe in it and understand what's in it for them, along with what's in it for the bigger planet, of course, is crucial. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of takeaways for our audience and listeners from this fireside chat today. And we would love to continue these conversations with you in upcoming fireside chat, talking a little bit more about this topic as well. So thank you so much for coming today here.
Absolutely, Archana. I'm so happy to be here, and I really hope that anybody watching this, any members of your community, reach out to continue the conversation. I believe you'll share my email. I think I'll share with you a link as well so that people can just book a slot in my calendar and we can have a chat.
Sure. Thank you so much. That's great.
Thank you.